Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Ken Margolis, partner of Castle Placement, walks us through his 30-year finance career. We learn how he quickly moved from audit at Arthur Andersen back in the 80s to structured finance with Soloman Brothers as his first client. How Credit Suisse, then First Boston, made him an offer he couldn't refuse to jump ship. How he survived multiple crises and layoffs and why he ended up transitioning to Merrill in 1999. Listen to hear about his long, successful run there, all the different groups he worked in, what he liked best, and why right before the great financial crisis, he decided to leave and set up his own business. Enjoy. All right, Ken, welcome to the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thank you.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. My bio is very long because I'm very old, but I graduated from college in 1985. I went to the State University of New York at Albany. Out of school, I joined Arthur Andersen, which back then was a big 8 accounting firm. Now there are no more big 8s, big 4. I worked there for 6 years, left there as a manager, did a variety of things, but perhaps we'll go into that a little bit more. When I left Arthur Andersen, I went to what was then called First Boston Corporation, which then turned into Credit Suisse First Boston. There, I ran the agency and whole loan CMO new issuance desk. And I was also subsequently a prop trader of credit sensitive securities. And then
Of what securities? Sorry.
Credit sensitive securities.
Yep. Okay.
So these are asset-backed securities, mortgage-backed securities, anything that had something to do with credit associated with it.
Yep.
Then in 2000, I joined Merrill Lynch. At Merrill Lynch, I did a variety of things, including sales, trading, banking. Eventually ran a group of about 100 people globally. And then in 2008, I started what is now today Castle Placement, which is an investment bank. And that's kind of my bio.
Awesome. Really helpful to kind of frame everything. So let's go all the way back to SUNY. So when you were back there, were you thinking finances for me? I want to be an auditor. Like, what was the thought process? Was your family in the business, and was it just like, hey, this is going to be a really stable career, or what?
I'm not sure I had a great plan. I went to Albany. It was a very good school for accounting, and I just fell into it, really. My plan was to get into the Big 8 and really only stay there for 2 years and then go to law school.
Got it. So you thought law school, getting the JD was going to be potentially in your future, practice law, the whole bit. Was there a reason for that? Family?
Yeah, my mother always told me I should be a professional. And to her, a professional was either doctor, lawyer, or accountant. So I figured I'd check off 2 of those boxes.
Is that from her kind of background, or like, is there a reason for that, or just they had heard it from somewhere?
My mother and father were a product of the Depression, and they always thought that you should have a stable job with a stable income, and they always viewed professionals as having stable income.
Well, you went through SUNY, and you kind of went through the program to start recruiting for one of the Big 8 back then. And so you landed the job. Was it hard to get a job at Arthur Andersen back then? Was it competitive coming out of school?
It was competitive. I did pretty well in school, so it was not an issue. I had offers from all the Big 8 accounting firms.
All 8? Wow. So did you have like a ton of interviews, first round interviews and everything? And
yes, I had actually 20 interviews and got in a little trouble for that because I wasn't supposed to apply to all the accounting firms that were coming up to Albany. And my dean of my business school made me go on every single one of the interviews, despite having job offers. So,
oh wow,
as punishment. But anyway, it worked out okay.
It worked out. It sounded like 20 20 initial interviews, you landed 8 offers. So clearly it was, you had good grades, I assume, and you're a good student. So you start there and you had a really good run of 6 years. So
Yeah, it wasn't actually so great at first.
yeah,
I
tell me a
did
little bit about
not, I did not like accounting. This was prior to Anderson Consulting or Accenture now. Back then, it was accounting and MICD, which is really more consulting, using more computers than management consulting.
Yep.
And my first 2 years, I worked on very large audits, and I did not like it. And I was very happy to already taken the LSATs, applied to law schools. I was ready to go, and I went out for drinks with a partner and told him basically that I didn't like accounting, and he wasn't surprised. And he said, "But I have this." Assignment or engagement going on down at Soloman Brothers, who's a big investment bank back then, that has nothing to do with accounting. It's more consulting. Maybe you like that. So the partner asks you to do something, you usually say, sure, whatever, and I did that. And it turned out I kind of backed my way into investment banking because of it. It was a group of really young people right out of school that were working side by side with the Soloman Brothers quants, they called them, that basically were doing all of the latest securitizations that were getting done. So back in the 80s, this is like 87 at this point, the first securitizations of asset classes started happening. And Soloman Brothers was the biggest investment bank at the time that was involved in that. And they basically used Arthur Andersen to help them with all those transactions. And what we would do is we would run in parallel. They would the quants from Soloman Brothers would basically model the deals, and then the young people from Arthur Andersen, like me, would model in parallel. Because I was pretty good back then in it was Lotus 123. This is before Excel. And
that's so awesome. That's so awesome.
And I also programmed in C. I was able to do a pretty good job, and I loved it. And before I knew
what did you love about it? It was just much more challenging, much more intellectually stimulating, or what? What else?
It was way more stimulating intellectually for me. These transactions had never been done before. In a lot of cases. And
can you give me one example of a type of deal that they were doing that may nowadays be commonplace, but back then it was novel?
Sure. The deals were basically taking portfolios of assets, tranching them into securities, and then issuing them. So you have to remember back then we did not have huge computer access. The PCs back then were very slow. So you needed to actually model them very quickly. And the typical deal would be anywhere between a few $100 million to $1 billion, anywhere from 1 to 10 tranches, a variety of different structures, and a lot of different asset classes, backed by agency mortgages, credit cards, auto loans.
Can you give us a little peek into what the difference of working in Lotus? Was it more like a terminal type interface? Was there any interface? Like, what was it like DOS? I remember DOS back in the day, but like, what was it more like that in terms of like, obviously there's no spreadsheet, right?
It was spreadsheet. It was similar to Excel.
Okay.
So, and you would write macros similar to you would today in Excel if you wrote them. But it was much slower, and you didn't have as much memory. In fact, when I first started, we didn't even have disk drives. We had what we referred to as Bernoulli boxes, which were big boxes that stored things. And for every deal, we'd have this big box called a Bernoulli box. You don't want to do it, basically. Having a hard disk is much better.
So you're kind of, you get a taste of, what really, structured finance, right? a little bit a few years in. And so was that like once you started working on that, you said to the partner, this is what I want to do? Or how did you continue doing work? I assume you stayed there in that group for another 4-ish years.
Yes, exactly. So I stayed there and I eventually managed the group. And we had about 25 people in the group at that point.
That's fast.
We
You got
actually
promoted.
were
You got
the-
promoted fast to manager then.
Yes.
Because you
promoted
just
fast
were
to
doing
manager.
really well.
Doing really well, but also right time, right place. The engagement was one of the highest revenue engagements in Arthur Andersen worldwide. And effectively, we had partners on the job who were good, but the reality was the group of us that had started together were really running the group, and they needed us.
They need you to stay, so they paid it. So were there big bonuses associated? I mean, for back then, were there big bonuses? I know in audit or a big four, you don't think of big bonuses, but was it just like big salary increases each year or something?
Definitely not. My starting salary at Arthur Andersen was $21,500 plus overtime.
That's awesome.
I'll never forget that. And when I got promoted to manager, I actually took a pay cut because I no longer had overtime. We were working 80 to 100 hours per week, and the overtime was huge. And then when I got fast promoted to manager, my salary compensation actually went down.
What was your salary at that point? Like 40 something, 50?
I'm going to say it was probably around 60,000 somewhere in that range.
But your bonus gets eliminated. Why? Because you can't work those
There
hours?
were no bonuses. It was just back then you didn't have bonuses. It was just before you were a manager, it was salary plus overtime.
Got it. Okay. So once you're manager, but the idea here is theoretically you go manager, then you eventually can work your way up to partner, right? Senior manager and then partner.
Definitely.
So what was your thought process? Were you thinking, I'm going to run this, I'm going to go all the way up to partner, like your first job out of school?
Actually, a very great question, because I expanded the group to work with other investment banks besides Soloman Brothers. Mm-hmm. So we worked with everyone back then, from Drexel to Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and First Boston. So
were you doing those? Sorry to interrupt. Were you doing those sales? Were you going and pitching to like the group what you could do for them and like helping them set it up? So you were the one. You were the face. That's awesome. Okay, so keep going.
So while I was the face, I was speaking to someone at First Boston who ran a big group at First Boston, and he hired us. But he said, "I have to ask you, why are you at Arthur Andersen? It makes no sense." And what had happened was we had gotten a huge amount of experience because we did all of these cutting edge deals for all of these investment banks. And we actually knew what other investment banks were doing, that other investment banks would love to know what they were doing. And I said to the person who actually has his own hedge fund today, very well-known person, and I said, well, just got promoted to manager. Think I'll, probably stay into partner. And he asked me, what does a partner make? And I told him.
What was that, like 100,000 something?
No, it was 300,000.
Okay.
And Arthur Andersen Partners did very well.
Yeah.
He said to me, well, if you join First Boston, I'll pay you that now. So I said, well,
this is 87 or 88 at this point.
No, this is 91. 1990, somewhere around that range.
Got it. So you've been promoted to manager. You're kind of running the deals. You're going in. Got it.
So I said to him, actually, I don't want to, this was like in October or something. And I said, I don't really want to wait a year and 2 months before I get paid all that money. He goes, no, that's what I'm going to pay you in December for 2 months. So I was married at the time, and I said, that's great. I have to talk about it with my wife. And he looked at me and said, what's wrong with you? And I said, I still have to talk to her about it. So I went home and talked about it with my wife, and my wife said, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just say yes?
I think you were like a deer in headlights, kind of like, what did he just say to me?
Completely. Never, ever thought coming from SUNY Albany, I would be making anywhere near that money.
That early.
Close to it.
That early in your career, 5 years.
And then I went to work at First Boston, and worked out well.
And what was your title, I guess, when they brought you? It didn't matter. I mean, they're paying you well, but were you head of that
Yeah, I
new
was head of
desk?
a new issuance desk, agency and whole loan CMOs. We were anywhere between third and fifth, sometimes second in the league tables. We were issuing a huge amount of agency and whole loan CMOs every year. So we had a structuring desk, trading component of that, and that was the area initially that I was responsible for.
So tell me how your time there, because you were at First Boston, Credit Suisse now for a good 8 years. So tell me how your time there evolved. Like you started out doing that stuff, but then, I think you
Yeah,
ended
so
up.
then, and it's interesting, like I've been through a lot of financial crises, and this was really my second one. My first one really was back uh, in '87 when I first had gotten, when I was at Soloman Brothers working for Arthur Andersen. 1987 was Black Monday, and I saw that crash. And I saw that it really influenced me because all these people, very smart, well-paid people, just got fired. And I, and we were standing there and we were thinking to ourselves, well, that must be over for us as well. But because our area was hot, it wasn't. And that actually, I learned that lesson early on. And the reason I say it is because in 1994, while I was head of the agency and whole loan CMO desk, we had a crisis. Not as well known as the other financial crises out there, but this one was a crisis having to do with mortgage derivatives, often called the David Askin crisis. But in any case, it took what was a really profitable area across all of Wall Street and it made it not so profitable. And because of that,
the crisis itself, what was it? Can you explain it for the listeners just a little bit about like what made it a crisis? Just the pricing on all the mortgage or collaterally backed securities suddenly tanked?
yeah, so it was interest rate sensitive product. Inverse floaters, IOs, and POs were in the hands of a relatively few large investors, and the liquidity completely dried up. Interest rates had moved against them dramatically, and the securities that they owned became almost worthless. And investment banks had large positions of these securities. At First Boston, we actually did not, but it didn't matter because unless you make money on Wall Street, you're not going to get a big bonus.
Meaning you guys weren't exposed to the big downturn. You didn't have these huge losses because you weren't holding the positions, but you still were that the business dried up because no one was taking on additional.
Exactly.
Okay.
And because of that, they fired pretty much everybody on the trading floor. There were a few sole survivors, and they brought in a new head of mortgages, very famous person. And
you can't say who it is. You can't say who it is.
I could say his name was Andy Stone. If you ever read Liar's Poker, you know who Andy Stone is. In any case, he pretty much fired everyone. He interviewed you, and I remember him interviewing me. He basically called me into his office, and all he said to me was, why should I keep you? And I said something like, because I'm, good at structuring agency CMOs. He goes, I structured agency CMOs before you. He was at Soloman Brothers also. So you don't have to tell me what you do. He said, why should I keep you? And then, not to go into a whole long story about it, but basically I told him that I thought I was good at relative value. He had what was then a newfangled Bloomberg. He goes, show me a bond that you think has value. This is on an interview.
Yeah.
I did. He's like, I think it's cheap. And then he said, go buy some.
I love it. This is like
really
Wild West.
Know what it meant completely. The next day or two, he comes back out and he said, how many did you buy? And I'm like, none. And he's like, why not? And they're like, because I wasn't sure you were really serious. And he goes, well, let me clue you in. Next time I tell you to do something and you don't do it, you'll find out how serious I am. And so it turned out that it was a good lesson. I ended up buying a lot of those types of securities and others, trading out of them, making a lot of money. And when it came time to basically firing people, I was one of the few people that fire.
How about how many people were cut out of the full? How big was the desk at that point, and when he came in, and then how?
I would say probably the mortgage trading desk, probably 30 people, and maybe 5 people survived.
Wow. Okay. Well, lucky you. Sounds like a real easy boss. But tell me
actually,
a little bit
he's actually a great guy.
A great, yeah. No, I mean, sometimes tough bosses can be good. So tell me a little bit about just the types of deals. So what knowledge do you have? I mean, obviously all the structuring you had done in that kind of deer in the headlights. I would, if the guy immediately pulls up a Bloomberg and he's telling you, show me what you would buy. You had just that experience, like what came to your head? How did you even remember or think to, of a specific security? Like, well, what did you?
Yeah, I had structured those securities and I knew they were trading cheap. So
got it.
Wasn't a huge stretch from my perspective.
Got it. Okay. So you did a lot of that on the prop trading for.
But that was prior to the prop trading. So when he took over, he decided that he did not want to do all the mortgages, and he created a commercial real estate group as well as a prop trading group. He asked me to join the prop trading group.
And so tell me what that means. What if for the listeners listening, how did your day-to-day change?
Day-to-day was very different. As opposed to issuing large securitized transactions, I basically bought and sold them for the book of Credit Suisse versus Boston. So you're on
Bloomberg. Are you on Bloomberg all day? What are you doing to get the pricing and analyze?
Yeah, no, there was not flow securities. It was stuff that traded by appointment. So it was very illiquid, credit sensitive securities that you had to really understand not only the structure associated with it, but also the credit of the assets that
the underlying
underlie
assets.
Those securities.
Yeah. So like what types of underlying assets were you trading in? So is it mostly mortgages or like?
It was everything. It was everything from residential mortgages, commercial mortgages, credit cards, auto loans. It was all those things that I had actually worked on the structures for when I was at Arthur Andersen. I actually started trading those types of securities.
Did you feel like all the work prior was good training for that? Or did you feel like
it was great training, great training.
And psychologically, tell me about that, at being a trader suddenly.
It's, being it wasn't that much different than you had a pretty big risk position running a new issuance desk as well. But it was a different type of position. This was a much longer term hold versus the agency CMO, whole loan CMOs, where we would buy effectively a portfolio that day and securitize it in the afternoon and sell it for the next few days. Here I was buying securities and holding them for anywhere from a few days to several months before trading out of them. So it was a different mentality.
And so did you feel like, just tell me how things evolved. Was there ups, like severe ups and downs, or it sounded like you were doing a good job? It sounds like you were doing a good job. I mean, you survived the first cuts, and then did the group grow once they put you in the
next crisis? So the next crisis,
in the 90s.
I'm thinking back, 1998. That was back when the emerging market Russian crisis happened, junk bond crisis. Mm-hmm. And part of the credit sensitive securities that we had included that, and it did affect the credit securities prices fairly dramatically. So the good news is we had traded out and we were fairly light at that point. We did have some securities that had issues for sure, but we were pretty good at doing some crisis trading to trade out of those positions into other positions that made money. And overall net, we did well even during the crisis. But that being said, the market in general for commercial real estate, which was a bigger part of the group that I worked in, wasn't doing as well. And that meant the end of this group that I was in. And that led me to go to Merrill Lynch.
Do you think that's common? Just whole groups get axed when there's actually subgroups or sub little niches in there that would be benefit to keep?
It is
more of a scalpel. They like just chop off the whole division that's not doing well when it could actually be the best time to be investing there.
It's definitely common. In a lot of instances, it's senior people that are getting cut as opposed to junior people. Mm-hmm. It really depends. Some firms have a lot more stability than other firms over the years as well. But I definitely saw a lot of change of the guard throughout my years at the different investment banks.
And that was your run there at First Boston was 8 years. So
9 years, but yeah.
Or 9 years. Okay, to 99. And then that's when you jumped to Merrill.
It's actually to 2000, I think. But yeah,
2000.
so
okay,
somewhere in that range.
I'm looking at your LinkedIn. I'm cheating. But it said 99.
Okay. Then you're probably right then.
Yeah. So you jumped to Merrill. Tell me why Merrill, and was it just prompted simply by the cuts?
I saw the handwriting on the wall, and at that point, the group lasted another year after I left. But I thought that it was a good time to move, and Merrill was building up their group in credit, structured finance, and they offered me a good position there. So I took it.
As a prop trader, you're kind of now moving back to the structuring side. Was that the idea? Like, what's your thought process there? Because a lot of people, when they're thinking sales and trading, or I want to go do prop trading, I think there's a little bit of the sense in the community that you're not going to develop enough skills to fall back on, and like the investment banking background where you're doing M&A or something like that gives you a broader foundation. Would you agree with that, or do you feel like, I mean, obviously you're now kind of falling back on your structured finance a little bit, that jump?
Yeah, I think that the skills that you have can be applied to all sorts of different products. There are people that stay within one product area and one discipline throughout their entire career, but that's not common. I think most people, as they move up, they either do other things, or they control groups that are banking, sales, and trading as you get more senior anyway. It just really depends on where you came from.
Yeah. So tell me about that transition specifically. You started interviewing, talking with people. How did that even work? You're so senior at that point. You've done you're a manager at Arthur Henderson. You got brought over with the kind of big money offer to get you over to First Boston, and you probably did really well there. You survived some big cuts, and then jumping to with your next jump, what was the thought process of like, what firm I go to? You wanted stability, maybe, but what else?
It had to. I didn't really interview. One of the senior person at Merrill who covered me because I was covered by the street when I was at Credit Suisse First Boston. I told him what was going on. It was no secret. Everyone knew kind of what was happening. Mm-hmm. And he asked me what my next move was, and I said, I don't know yet. He said, well, why don't you think about Merrill? And I said, okay, what about Merrill? And we talked about it and came up with a role for me that I liked. And that was really it. I didn't go to lots of different firms and interview or anything like that.
Do you feel like that was pretty common back then? It's just more like who you know and just the relationships where you're picking up the phone and having those conversations?
I don't think you send out your resume for jobs like that.
Exactly. So tell me how it changed yet again on you, and what it was. Did did it feel like you were going back to your previous role or your initial role at First Boston?
Yes, it definitely felt more like it was more of a new issuance type role. Capital markets is really what I focused on. And there, it was interesting because those securities that had all done poorly, that was to a large degree what the area that I was going into, structured credit and structured finance, had experienced. And because of that, there were a lot of good opportunities in the market at that point. It was not good for the people that had, obviously big losses, but for those people that had fresh capital, there were good opportunities. That's kind of what I try to work for.
And this was kind of a new initiative for Merrill. They didn't have these big losses.
No, it was Merrill had been in the business for many, many years.
So why did they, if they had experienced those losses, why did they decide to kind of continue to invest and bring you in? And
everyone experienced losses over time. And they weren't significant losses. It was just, it wasn't a great period for anyone in those areas. But the areas, today remain. You just have your ups and downs.
So you were eventually managing director at Merrill. Tell me a little bit about your progression there, because that was another long stint. Not a decade, but 8 years. So it was, I think in terms of people I've interviewed, you definitely have the longest stints. Not just because you're old, but just it's rare to see 6 years, 8 years.
You call me old?
I would just say it's rare, even for the guests that are in your age range. I've never seen such long stints. Like, you've survived multiple cuts. The shortest stint was 6 years.
Yeah. I know today, I have my two daughters, basically are at a college, and I see them and their friends, and they move jobs very quickly. I don't think it's a good idea. It's definitely in vogue now, and people do it. So obviously up to them, but I actually think that by staying at a firm for a longer period of time, you increase the likelihood of advancing. I think that there's a lot of fraternal type of chemistry that goes on there. And, if you're one of those people that's been around for a long time and you get along with other senior people within the organization, you probably are going to move up as time goes on. And I know that sometimes, even back when I first started, you can always jump to another area and for more money and promotion. And sometimes that worked for people, sometimes it didn't. For me, it didn't seem that smart unless I was really changing what I was doing. And I couldn't have an opportunity within the firm itself. So that's kind of my thought pattern on it. But, it worked for me anyway.
And so tell me about your kind of your progression at Merrill. Was it all the same types of deals for 8 years? You just grinding it out kind of thing?
I did a lot of different things: sales, trading, and banking. I had never done sales before, and I actually loved it. Never thought I would like it, but I really did like it a lot. Can
you break down like when you were doing sales, when you're doing trading, when you're doing banking, and kind of?
Sure. So started off doing more capital markets, which is more marketing, going out to large investors and talking to them about different products that Merrill basically had within structured finance and structured credit. And then went into sales. Basically there, I was selling, I had my bunch of accounts that I covered did what a salesperson does. I think being a trader gave me an advantage as a salesperson, as well as being a structurer, because I understood the different aspects of it, and I could talk the language of anyone at the client investor that we were speaking with.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely helped. And did very well as a salesperson, and then got promoted to actually running a banking group that initially was raising capital for credit type companies. These were hedge funds and special purpose entities,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, that we called it the Alternative Investment Group. I ran that for a while, and then eventually got promoted to a bigger group that ran lots of different departments.
Yeah, and so at one point you had about 100 people under you at Merrill, and tell me a little bit about what was the day-to-day like? How did that shift from when you were like on the ground doing the sales to going to the clients to, I assume you're doing less of that by the time you were.
Yes, yes and no. It was more of a managerial type role, and also meeting with large investors and large companies that we were trying to get to hire us to raise capital for them. But it was definitely not on the day-to-day flow that you would be as a trader or a salesperson or capital markets person.
So did you have a lot of problems with like personnel and turnover, or were you like, how was it? Were you the person that had to fire people? Like when they
hired people? Yes, definitely. I didn't really like that all that much.
Mm-hmm.
That part of it, the administrative aspect of it was not fun, for sure. But it definitely had benefits as well. So all in all, it was a very good run, and enjoyed it.
So as you're approaching 2007, what's the thought process of I'm going to go set up my own shop? How did you end up getting there? And then tell me about your timing.
Yeah, so 2007 was another crisis, another financial crisis. I thought that it would be a very good time to basically leave and start something else.
Did they slash like your entire group, or what was the?
I left about a year before that actually happened.
Yeah,
6 months to a year, but eventually all groups in those areas got slashed, and eventually came back, but got slashed. But my thought process was that I saw the handwriting on the wall. I knew that there would be, just like in all the past crises, opportunity. And I thought if I was ever going to leave and try and do something on my own.
So something kind of struck me is a few times you've seen the handwriting on the wall. Is it obvious when you're in there to see the handwriting on the wall? Is it more just like rumor? Is it just the markets, the way they're behaving? What allows you to see that ahead of time? Because it sounds like twice you had jumped before, kind of, shit hit the fan, for a better expression.
Yeah, you definitely, when you're in the thick of it, you sometimes can't see the bigger picture. But I think it's always a good idea to think about where you're going with your career and what opportunities are out there. So, for me, I thought that this was just a good turning point where I could do something else and maybe do something on my own, as opposed to working, only at big firms.
That's surprising to me, because from what I've seen, at least with this pandemic and the latest kind of crisis, I feel like people have been are more hesitant to jump and kind of stuck around at the larger companies, the safety of that. You're going and saying, no, I'm going to go set up my own shop. What gave you the confidence? Maybe you didn't know the extent of the global financial crisis when you jumped or what it would be like, but tell me a little bit about the confidence you needed to have that this is the right time when you saw the writing on the wall.
You're never sure. I wasn't sure about it at all, but I thought that there would be a big opportunity as at this point the market had not completely crashed. It was having its ups and downs, but the handwriting was on the walls that it would crash, and I thought at that point there would be some sort of opportunities to pick up securities cheap and do something associated with that, raise capital, do something that would make it opportunistic so that I could take advantage of it.
So tell me, as you approached that decision, how did you even prepare for it? Did you have you had to get the legal documents and, get the...
Well, the first thing is I had to leave Merrill Lynch. So you go on garden leave for a long period of time
right.
and non-compete, et cetera. And then once my garden leave was up, what I started doing was consulting for large private equity firms that were either owned banks or that were in distress, or owned other types of financial companies that were in distress, or were being opportunistic and looking to buy those types of portfolios. And
they needed somebody to tell them what's in this and how much is it really worth, kind of thing. Yeah.
As best you could, because there was no real market guidance. It was all over the map as to where prices were. And value was more something that you had to look down the road to see what was going to come back and what was not going to come back. Mm-hmm. Some stuff just became worthless, but there were some securities that were still out there and assets that had good value.
So tell me about, a little bit about Castle Placement and how so you were doing some consulting for how long was that? A year, 2 years?
It's about a year, year and a half. And we basically realized that as we were coming out of the financial crisis, my partner and I, we knew that financial companies were going to need capital. And we actually raised capital during that period for a fairly well-known today firm that we said, wow, this is interesting. Because we really weren't thinking more about capital raising. We were thinking more about, at that point, consulting / hedge fund type of opportunities. But when we were able to raise...
Meaning raising your own fund?
Yeah, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was we saw that capital raising was an interesting niche that no one was really doing for these types of companies. And we, out of the gate, did a very big capital raise, made a lot of money. And we said, why don't we do you mind
this? Do you mind sharing how much you made or a range?
I'm not gonna do that, but it was good. And what ended up happening is initially, and this is what Castle Placement is today, we are an investment bank. We raise debt and equity for companies and funds. We're industry agnostic. Our capital raises have ranged from as small as 5 million to as large as 500 million, but our average capital raise is about 100 million. And after 12 years, we've pretty much raised capital for every industry out there. We have.
What's 25. The most common? Is it more like the financial institution is your most common client, or what's?
Initially, that was the case, and then we widened our breadth, and today financial institutions, real estate, technology, energy are probably the top three that we work in. But we have absolutely raised capital for everything from farms, apparel companies, things that you wouldn't associate someone with my background. And the reason for that is because we hire bankers who have the expertise in those areas to affect capital raises in those transactions.
And how do you feel like that initial large transactions kind of helped you, just propelled you in terms of reputation and everything, in terms of bringing up other deals, or what? Yeah, I mean, what has allowed you to do this for over a decade successfully?
Well, what's interesting is we've changed completely how we operate from when we first started. I would call us more an accidental fintech investment bank than anything. when we first started, we did it the old-fashioned way. We did it the way that we did it at Merrill Lynch and First Boston, and which was basically we used our Rolodex of people that we knew to get assignments, and we used our Rolodex of investors to basically invest in those companies. As time went on, we realized quickly our niche was much bigger than what you would typically do at a large investment bank, where you pretty much are dealing with large companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, and very, very large institutional investors. Here, our focus is anywhere from early stage to lower middle market. There are over 1 million companies in the U.S. alone like that, and as far as investors go, there's hundreds of thousands of institutional investors that we deal with that invest in these things. And we realized quickly that we couldn't use a Rolodex to basically cover all those companies and all those investors. So we invested heavily in data and technology so that today we have about 500,000 companies in our database that we are constantly staying in front of through technology, social media, et cetera, talking to them about what's going on in their industry, when they have capital raising needs, reaching out to them, as well as investors. We have about 100,000 investors in our database. We have very granular data on what each contact at that investor invests in, so that when we get hired, we're not guessing who to go to. But by using a matching algorithm, we effectively can go out to a large number of investors, yet at the same time not be spamming the world to find an investor. And it's worked out fairly well. We've added a lot of technology associated with it. We've got apps. We've done a lot of different things that I never thought that we would do as a investment bank, and large investment banks, right now are not doing, to make the capital raising process a lot more efficient.
Talk to me about your team, the size of your team, and how many are in like that developer kind of technical hires versus the pure investment bankers that are maybe, once you find that kind of more niche, group of investors, I assume they are picking up the phone at some point, right?
So I'll start on we kind of think you need 50-50. So we think you need 50% great investment bankers and 50% great data and technology to actually raise capital for the market that we're in. We have 25 bankers. They are all over the map on their backgrounds. Many are from large Wall Street firms, many are from large asset managers, and many are from the corporate environment. They all, at least the more senior bankers, have 25 plus years experience doing this, and they can basically talk the language of any company that comes through the doors. When we had doors pre-COVID, through Castle Placement, and we think that you need bankers to close deals because they're complicated, and you can't just do it through data and technology. On the data and technology side, we have a relatively small group that basically does it. It is a big focus of mine. My structuring background, back that program, definitely has helped, especially in the beginning when it was just me that was doing it. But at the end of the day, what we've developed is a bunch of, in addition to the data, which is really, really important, very hard to maintain, very hard to clean and keep it going. But that data is extremely valuable. And then when you combine it with the technology that we've created, it's a 1-2-3 punch with investment bankers that we think gives us a big advantage versus our competition.
It's exciting. Well, you've been around for a good while, doing well. So congrats on all the success. And
congrats to you.
Yeah, thank you. Tell me a little bit about, so before we call it, any final words of wisdom specifically on just your path looking back, because you kind of had a few pivots here and there from from audit to structured finance, then to eventually to another firm, then to the prop trading, back to structured finance, and now on your own. So there's been you definitely touched on a lot of different kind of functions. You've ran large teams. You've been on the ground, executing the trade. So any words of wisdom to people who are interested in just the world of finance right now, today?
I'm not that comfortable doing words of wisdom, but I would say that the one thing that I think you should always do is treat people that work for you, that work with you, and that work above you well. I think looking back over the years, the best contacts that I continue to use go back 20 plus years. And some of them I worked for, some of them I worked with, and some of them worked for me. Some of them who worked for me have gone on to do great things. And it's amazing. And those are the best contacts that you'll have. And I would just say that as you're going through your career, you should keep your eye on that ball to make sure, because you get lost sometimes, in the nitty gritty of realizing that, we're all part of the same team and we help each other. It's not just today, it's tomorrow too.
All right. Love it. Well, listen, Ken, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.